This interview with Billy Mitchell was done live on WKCR-FM back on December 19th, 1984. And I'm recording this, talking to you, in early 2021, so it's, close to 40 years ago that this interview was done. And I share it with a certain amount of chagrin because certainly I would have done it differently if I could do it now. And there's a certain kind of informality in talking to an elder musician that I find it a little odd to listen to. But nonetheless, he was very patient with me and certainly dropped a lot of knowledge, and we got to listen to some music, and I'm eternally grateful for that opportunity. We got to record together with Jimmy Heath's band a few years later for an album called Little Man, Big Band on Verve Records, and I got to see his first-class professionalism up close, and that was a lesson as well. So let's go back to 1984 and the part of the interview that deals with his great past and what he was doing in the present. The first part of the interview, which I'm not sharing, was pretty much he had brought a copy of the Sarah Vaughan album, Singing Music with Words by the Pope, among other folks, and he was involved with the folks who produced that album when we listened to it. And there wasn't much talk beyond, here's the music and let's listen to it and let's share it. It was the first time, actually, that album was being aired on New York City radio, so that was kind of exciting. But when that was done, then we got to the meat of the interview. So let's go back to 1984 and the Colossus of Detroit, Billy Mitchell.
You were a member of that great wave of jazz musicians that came out of Detroit. And when you think of those days, I'm just curious, what kind of feeling was going around Detroit? It must have been a tremendous sense that something was happening. Was that the case?
Well, there was a lot happening. In those days, there were a lot of jazz clubs. There were a lot of black jazz clubs, things that we don't have really today. And there were a lot that were not owned by blacks, but they were in black neighborhoods, and they were patronized exclusively by blacks. And a certain percentage were owned by blacks, especially in Detroit and in Chicago. And there were many, very many, which after the 50s, and early 60s, this sort of died out. Mm-hmm. But in Detroit alone, there were, several, like in 1944, I played some of the best acts we had at the time, Billy Eckstein, Lena Horne, the Miller Brothers and Lois, the Peters Sisters, the Nicholas Brothers, and this was in a black club in a black neighborhood. It was Jewish owned, but what I'm saying is there was plenty of work for us, and there were maybe 3 or 4 clubs, and in every club had a 4 or 5 piece band and a singer and a tap dancer or a comedian. There was a lot more going on. Or it seemed to be. Maybe it was because I was younger. I thought it was different.
Right, so there was a lot of opportunity to work and to have these interchange with all the other musicians. What a fascinating time. And of course, you also came up in a time when such rapid changes were happening in jazz.
We were conscious of the fact that history was being made, and there was division about it, too. There were some who felt it was being made too fast, and some felt it was being made fast enough, and there was controversy, division, but still it was great. It takes turmoil for change.
Yeah. This date has been listed in some books as 1948, which you're saying is wrong. It was a little bit later.
Yeah.
It was early 50s.
Early 50s.
Which would make sense.
I came to New York in 1948, and I didn't start this band until after I left Woody Herman in 1949, and then went back to Detroit and started this band in 1950.
Right.
So it had to be 51. Or after.
And were these your first records, or had you recorded with Woody?
No, I didn't record with Woody. Those were my first records under my own name.
These are Billy Mitchell's first records, and we'll hear 2, Compulsory and the Blue Room. Is that Rodgers and Hart Blue Room?
Yes.
Yeah. Thad Jones, and those you mentioned those were Thad's arrangements, and
That was Thad Jones, trumpet, Elvin Jones, drums. Terry Pollard was playing vibes and piano. Thad played piano while Terry played her vibe solo. Jimmy Richardson on the bass.
yeah, and our guest Billy Mitchell on the tenor. That was a working band, as you mentioned.
We played at one place there for almost 4 years, and we played around Detroit together for 5 years. We kept that band together for 5 years. That's the sort of thing that doesn't happen much now either, you know, that bands get a chance to really get together and grow and become units, you know, integrated units, because they never work anywhere long enough, you know.
Amen.
You know, it's a different thing every night now, where it used to be you went in a place and you stayed at least 3-4 months, or even here in New York, if you played a place like Birdland, they didn't change it once every 3 weeks.
Right.
Now it's to get a week is almost impossible.
Okay, well, that's why that band sounds so tight. And you mentioned that record, what was the name of it again? Motor City Junction. It's such a great record because that was made in New York, but it was guys who'd played together in Detroit. You mentioned playing that repertoire, just getting together and doing it after, and that's why that record is such a classic.
Some of the audio is missing from the original tape of this 1984 talk with Billy Mitchell, and here he was in the midst of talking about the great African American theaters where entertainers would tour back during the days when he was growing up in Detroit in the 1940s.
The Apollo here in New York, the Adams in Newark, the Majestic in Cleveland, and the Regal in Chicago, the Royal in Baltimore, and I could go on. There was one everywhere. And the bands played a regular circuit of the theaters. So from week to week, it was another band. This week it was Basie, next week it was Callaway, the week after that it was Hampton or the Alabama State Collegians or Erskine Hawkins and George Hudson. There were many more. There was much more going on, as I was saying. So at 1940, so at the time I was around 13, 14 years old, I was already active musically, so I was very much aware of all the saxophone players such as Don and Shoeberry and Lester. And that was about the time jazz made a sort of renaissance when Lester came out with those. Were they dial records?
Oh, the keynotes.
Just You, Just Me.
I never
and
knew.
Johnny Guarneri, was it?
Yeah.
Well, they made a big splash during those years. Those were big things like
Sometimes I'm Happy.
Right.
Right.
What year was that?
43.
Well, those were the years. Those were big, important years, you know.
Sure.
And Bird come along, breezing through shortly afterwards.
When did you first see Presley with Basie, I guess, or maybe a little
I couldn't
less?
say when I first became aware of Pres, but it must have been somewhere, or when I first saw them. We'd have to say somewhere from 40, 41.
In later years, did you get to hear him and meet him as a fellow saxophonist?
Yes, yeah, I knew him quite well.
Yeah. And how about Ben?
Ben was one of my favorites, and I was one of his favorites. He followed me all over the world. We played with a pool cue and a bottle of schnapps in his pocket. I would be anywhere in the world, and my phone would ring, and the lady on the desk would say, "Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Webster's in the lobby," and I knew what to do. Come downstairs, and there would stand Ben with a pool cue and a quart of schnapps, and say, "Let's go," and we'd head for the nearest pool room. He was trying to win a game of three-cushion billiards from me. He never did.
Never did. It's exactly 7 o'clock. I'm going to announce again. This is WKCR FM in New York, 89.9, your FM dial. The Musician Show. Our guest, tenor saxophonist Billy Mitchell, reminiscing about some of the great tenor men who he encountered. How about the other one we didn't mention, Coleman Hawkins?
Hawk, I knew not as well as Ben. Just a couple of times in live we stood and talked for a few minutes, but I wasn't as close to him as I was with Ben. Same as with Don. 3 or 4 times in life we passed conversation for quite a while, but I think I knew Ben and Prez better than any of them.
Mm-hmm. How about some of the other young saxophonists like yourself that were coming up in Detroit in the mid-1940s? Pepper Adams and Frank Foster and
Frank Foster from
Pontiac?
Cincinnati, but he spent a lot of time around Detroit, and not a lot of time. It was just a couple of years around. He came there with Snooky Young, as a matter of fact, to play a club there. Snooky Young brought a band from Dayton, Ohio, and he came there with him, and he stayed around for a couple of years. And then he went into the Army from Detroit.
Right.
But the saxophone players around Detroit at the time I was coming up, Bill Evans, who later became Yusuf Lateef, and Pepper, of course. There was Warren Hickey. There was a fellow that's still there, fantastic saxophone player named George Benson. Lefty Edwards, Harold Bowles.
Was Wardell from Detroit?
Wardell was from Detroit.
He was
also.
from Detroit.
Wardell was like not a generation, but a few years ahead of me, you know. And this is sort of a stair-step thing. Like Wardell was 4 or 5 years ahead of me. I'm probably about 4 or 5 years ahead of Pepper.
Right.
Yusuf is 4 or 5 years ahead of me. You know, same. Yusuf is 5 years older than I am. I remember he was in that same band. I was 17, he was 22. But there was quite a few more too. Lucky Thompson was from through that era. Sonny Stitt was from Saginaw, which is fairly close. I didn't know him around Detroit though, not for any great length of time. I don't think he really spent any length of time during those years around there.
How did you first become aware of Charlie Parker? Was it through the Grapevine and the Jay McShann records, or did you hear him first?
Musically, I think I first became aware of Charlie Parker musically. Little Bird, that's Jimmy Heat, and myself, were playing with a band called Nat Toll's Orchestra, it's a territory band from the Middle West. And we were at the time in Baltimore playing at the Royal Theater, and somebody brought in the Tiny Grimes records, the Romance Without Finances and New Sense, and Red Cross. As I remember, I think those are the first things we ever heard, and I think Little Bird found them first and came tearing to my room with them, as I remember, you know. But I think that's the first we both had heard that, you know, and we were completely amazed. But I did know him before that, I think. You know, I may be mistaken, but I think he used to come to my house, and he was a schoolmate of some of my older cousins. You know, I'm from Kansas City originally.
What a tremendous thing to be in and around all that music. And how did the guys share knowledge in those days?
I'm sure that we sat out and compared notes, and I'm sure that they're still doing the same thing today.
Sure.
No matter what their age is or what their strata is, you know, music is something if you like it, you're interested. If you find someone else that's interested, there has to be an exchange of some kind. So I think that's pretty much the same.
You mentioned that you first came to New York in 1948. When you went with Woody Herman, was that taking Gene Ammon's place?
Yes.
Was that why you came to New York?
No, I came to New York with Lucky Millender's orchestra. At the same time, that band was Jimmy Nottingham, Al Gray, Joe Wilder. I'm trying to think of people you might know today. You know, so many have passed and so many have gone back. Like a fellow named Amos Gordon, he went back to his home in Birmingham and became a professor of music there. So I was trying to think of people just remember. And then from that band, I went to Lunsford's band. Lunsford had died by that time, but they had a memorial tour going. The band was being led by Joe Thomas and Eddie Wilcox. And then Walter Fuller had a band, which we never made anything, nothing ever happened. Worked with a small band with Milton Buckner, Julius Watkins and myself and Buck. And then he enlarged to a large band, which was a very good band, but the public thought it sounded too much like Lionel Hampton, which was rather ironic, I think, because at that time a lot of the songs that made Lionel Hampton popular were Milton Buckner compositions, you know.
Right.
But when he played his own compositions, people seemed to think he was imitating, you know. And then I left here and went back to Detroit. And it was from Detroit that I left and went to Chicago to join Woody Hermantick in Gene Ammons' place.
I see. How long did you stay with
Woody?
With Woody.
About 6 months.
I see. That must have been a kick.
It was a good band, and at the time I was in the band, I was one of the four brothers. It was myself, Jimmy Jufrey, and a fellow named Swartz from Philadelphia, Serge Chaloff, and Sam Marowitz. It was a nice band. It did.
Yeah.
Lou Levy on piano, Marianne McCall. I just worked with Woody April of this year in the Bern, Switzerland Jazz Festival, and we did a thing, the Four Brothers, myself, Sal Nistico, Zoot Sims, and Bill Perkins. It was nice working with Woodrow again. He's a nice gentleman.
That's quite a bit of playing and quite a bit of bands to cram into just a few years. You went back to Detroit, and then was it to...
Yeah, I went from Dizzy's band to Basie's. Dizzy was 56 and 57. I joined Basie New Year's Day 1958. Was the longest job I ever had in my life. I left in February 1961. 3 years. I think that's about the longest I've ever been employed.
And there's so much music to play from all these eras. We're just going to listen to a few things with Count Basie because we know that you can only spend about another half hour with us or so. But again, we'd like to invite you back up some other time and we can put a whole bunch of things together and talk in more detail about it.
I remember this day. Frank Foster wrote most of these arrangements, and I liked them all. They all swing. This was a nice day. Yeah, I did the Every Tub, the Shorty George, the Boogie Woogie. Hey, let's play it.
Okay, all right. Billy Mitchell with Basie's band.
baby bad. Wanna see my baby bad. That's the sweetest woman that I have ever had. Well, I love to hear my baby call my name. I love to hear my baby call my name. She can call so easy and oh so doggone plain. Baby, baby, what's on your worried mind? Baby, baby, what is on your worried mind? You just keep me bothered and worried all the time. Well, I may be wrong, but I won't be wrong always. Well, I may be wrong, but I won't be wrong always. You're gonna long for me, mama, one of these
loved that saxophone section. I think there were 2 saxophone sections. Well, there were 3. We had in Dizzy's band we had a good saxophone section. Was when we had Ernie Henry, Jimmy Powell, Benny Golson, myself, and tenor player out of Philadelphia used to play with Benny Green.
Billy Root.
Billy Root converted to baritone. Boy, that little boy could boot that baritone. We had a good section there, and then Basie's band, of course, was Marshall and superb. And Frank was doubling alto and tenor, whichever one he picked up first, he played the part on. And Pootsie, that's Charlie Folks. Merry Christmas, Liza. And myself. Who was it? It was me and Frank West, Frank Foster, Charlie Folks, and Marshall. That was great. And then in the Bolon band, that was great. Derek Humble, myself, Tony Cole, Ronnie Scott, and Sahib Shahab. Those are about the 3 best reed sections I played in my life. I loved all 3 of them.
Luckily, this band was recorded very often, very frequently. There are a lot of records which you would count, but this particular one was interesting because it showed the 50s band playing the music of the 30s band, and we heard every tub boogie woogie on which it didn't sound like you, it sounded like Frank Foster, as you mentioned.
I think that was Fearless Fosdick.
Is that a nickname for Frank?
One of many.
One of many. And then we conclude, of course, with Shorty George, which did have you on the tenor saxophone. First, I want to thank you so much for coming up and spending this time with us, and invite you anytime you have time. Billy Mitchell has 2 albums that are currently in print, among others, but these 2 under his own name on Xanadu.
I was just going to mention on Xanadu Records. Merry Christmas, Nina.
And one is called The Lord's Blues. That's Xanadu 182. And the other is called Billy Mitchell, the Colossus of Detroit, 158. How did that nickname come about?
That's one of Don Slitton's creations. The Lord, that's one of my nicknames. There's a story behind that. My phone rang one day, and I answered it and said, sometimes I would say, this is a police station. This particular day I answered my phone and I said, hello, you've reached heaven. And the gentleman said, I said, you've reached heaven. This is the Lord speaking. He said, oh, I must have the wrong number. And hung up.
These are 2 great records. You're also, I believe, on those Xanadu and Africa records, aren't you?
Oh, that was a kick.
Yeah.
That was a ball. We went to Xanadu. I went to Africa, and we did the first recordings in Africa. Yeah. I'm hoping to go back to Africa soon. As a matter of fact, I'm working on it now. A friend of mine, his brother is a friend of mine, a neighbor of mine, Roger Lewis. His brother is the ambassador to Sierra Leone, and we were talking to him recently about going over there to take some jazz.
The interview concluded with a track from one of the Xanadu albums that we were discussing at that point, so we'll listen to it now. And this is called The Lord's Blues, and it was a wonderful band that appeared on that album with Billy Mitchell. Tommy Flanagan on piano, Rufus Reed bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums, and Benny Bailey, the great trumpeter with whom Billy Mitchell had played so much during his European years. So here it is, the great Billy Mitchell.